Every summer since 2013, me and my three best buds, John, Frankie, and Bad Reggie, all turn our phones off for a weekend out in the great Tennessee wilderness, exchanging our angry birds for real birds. It's truly majestic to unplug the computer and just spend some quality time with some of your closest male friends. We like to say that we survive with nothing more than our wits, but naturally we get by with a little help from our friend Natty Light, not to mention bourbon. We've been doing it for 5 years now, and we always have a blast, male bonding and basically just shooting the breeze. It is like being totally free amongst the pines and rocks and all the other things found in nature. This year we went to Spivvy Cove, which of course has plenty of designated campsites, but we like just to venture deep into the woods, really roughing it. As soon as we exited the confines of our minivan, I think we all exhaled multiple breaths of relief, and then, after that, we all inhaled deep wafts of fresh pine air. It was that clean kind of air that can only be breathed in rural surroundings. We all mounted our cases of Natty Light like shoulder-mounted rocket launchers that were ice cold. Bad Reggie and Frankie carried a massive cooler full of ice and food. The plan was to not have a plan and just get drunk and eat hot dogs. That's always our plan. However, and I still feel crazy saying it out loud, but we found something weird in the woods. Something so weird that we aren't sure whether to even notify the local authorities or not for fear of repercussions. It happened on our second day of camping. We were buzzing pretty good from the brewskis and having a great time, just walking over various rocks and twigs and gazing intently at all of nature's beauteous wonders. We could even hear the songs of various birds all around and above us. It was like a bird symphony, if that makes any sense. Eventually we set up a campsite, and Frankie built a small campfire in order to cook some of our food, aka delicious all-beef franks. John threw a can of beans into the fire because he said it was faster, and then it exploded and a single bean burned Bad Reggie on the arm. It left a little bean-shaped burn, and we all had a good laugh at Reggie's latest hilarious mishap. Sometime after the memorable bean incident, I ventured deeper into the vibrant green trees to find some solitude in which to take a dump. After taking care of business, I could have sworn I heard faint voices coming from the direction of some big bushes to the north, so I moved toward them, cupped my ears expertly, and listened carefully. Sure enough, I could hear a man and a woman talking. After maybe 15 seconds, they came into view. They were wearing all black and appeared to be looking for something on the ground. I emerged from the secret space from which I had just defecated and approached them with a friendly wave of the toilet paper roll I was still holding and a hello, and then I said, "Did your dog get loose or something?" And they just stood up and looked at me like they were really surprised to see someone. I noticed the woman had a large walkie-talkie in her hand, and before she said anything to me, she held it up to her face and said, "That's not Italian." They both laughed at this obvious inside joke, and then both warmed up and told me their names were Brett and Rebecca, and that they were not camping but participating in some kind of corporate training retreat for Olive Garden. I said something to the effect of, "Oh, you work for Olive Garden?" And they both looked at each other, and then Brett said, "Not yet. I guess this is part of their interview process for corporate hires." Rebecca explained to me that they were just talking about how neither of them had any kind of corporate experience and that this seemed like a dream come true. They were both excited and very willing to jump through all of the necessary hoops to secure these jobs. I asked them what they were looking for, and again they exchanged that look with one another. "I guess it's a scavenger hunt," Rebecca said, and then explained that they were on the lookout for mushrooms, rocks, and pine cones, but only those that fit the exact Olive Garden quality specifications or something like that. They said it had something to do with testing their ability to determine quality, but it sounded kinda nuts to me. But what do I know? I've never had an office job in my life. Brett was distracted while Rebecca explained the scavenger hunt to me, and he came back from some random bushes with a pine cone that was skinny and curved at the end. He held it up for Rebecca to inspect, and she smiled and used the walkie-talkie again. "Now that's Italian," she said, and then noticed me laughing. They gave us these phrases that we have to use every 5 minutes to check in. I told them that Olive Garden seemed like a fun place to work. I asked them if they had a campsite or something nearby, and that's when Brett got excited. "Man, you wouldn't believe it. There's this old cabin over back that way." He pointed to the area they emerged from. "Anyway, they transformed the whole thing to look like an actual Olive Garden. It has a sign and tables and everything." I hadn't seen any cabins in this area, so I was surprised to say the least. I made a joke about sharing the unlimited breadsticks, but Rebecca didn't think it was funny and said, all serious, that they hadn't been fed yet, but there was like a banquet or something tonight. Then they exchanged that knowing look again and said that they needed to keep looking for rocks and crap before it got dark. I watched them disappear into the same shady area they had come out of, and then shook my head in disbelief. I couldn't imagine a job being worth so much trouble. I made my way back to our camp, and the boys made the obligatory jokes about me taking too long to crap, and when they had settled down, I sat down on a very mossy log and told them about the 2 strange people I had just met. They didn't really believe me at first. Frankie said his cousin Tina worked for Olive Garden, and they definitely didn't make her hunt for rocks in the woods because Tina hates being outside, and she would have complained, or maybe even have not taken the job. I had to explain 3 times that this was a retreat for corporate upper management positions before they started to understand, though they didn't act like they totally believed me. When it started to get dark, we were drinking more beers around the fire, telling stories that were scary or sometimes just weird stories. That's when Bad Reggie had the bad idea to go find that cabin that might also be an Olive Garden and see what was going on. I don't think he believed that we would actually find a cabin. Now, all I can say is I wish we hadn't either. I led the way deep into the trees and grass and bushes. We all had our flashlights, which was a bright idea because there was no moon and it was too dark to see anything otherwise. We left our campfire burning because, to be honest, we assumed we would be right back. It would just be a short but spooky journey into the darkness. Maybe we would find some dumb corporate training group in a cabin, but we would be back in no time. I got a little confused in the dark, but eventually I found the area again and we made our way through to where Brett and Rebecca had gone earlier. There was sort of a path, or at least it could be described as an area with very few trees, so we naturally just followed that. We only stopped once to do shots out of some bourbon that Reggie had in his flask. I guess I should mention that we were all a little tipsy, which is definitely why we were brave enough to be exploring the unknown in the woods in the dark. Eventually we began to hear voices, and suddenly we got really quiet as we made our stealthy approach. There was a light that was piercing through the trees. We went around some large bushes, and there it was, an old cabin in the woods, and there was even an old Olive Garden sign leaning against the porch. I remember wondering how they had got something so massive out here in the first place. The boys were suddenly really excited and started punching me in the dark and trying to suppress their laughter. You would have thought we had found the fabled Mexican city made of gold or girls skinny dipping in an 80s movie, but it was just a rotting old cabin with a dirty sign that promised endless possibilities. But, I have to admit, I was excited as heck as well as we army crawled up to the side. We stood up in the darkness next to the cabin after waiting for a few moments, and realizing that nobody was in fact around. That seemed strange. There was one window on our side that had light shining forth, so we got up on our tiptoes and peered inside. The room we were gazing into appeared to be a kitchen, as there was an old refrigerator and a table at which a person was passed out, their arms stretched out in front of them. There was a red plastic cup and an overturned chair on the floor. We all agreed that it looked like they had quite a party, and maybe they would just let us join if we pretended to stumble onto it. We casually walked around to the back of the cabin, where we were quite surprised to discover a large white van. It had the Olive Garden logo painted on the side, but the artwork is what I would describe as suspiciously unprofessional. How did they even get that thing back here? The answer to that question, we soon discovered, was a kind of trail that was winding back into the trees. We followed that dark path for what felt like 10 minutes but was probably only a few. Eventually we began to see another light, but this one was not from a cabin but from a large bonfire. As we approached what we assumed was the party, we grew quiet. There were about 10 figures standing around a massive bonfire, which was so big I would almost just call it a regular fire. I tried to find Rebecca and Brett, but all of the people were wearing robes with hoods that were covering their heads and faces. There seemed to be 1 or 2 people who were at the front, and all of the others were watching them. This made me think of the weird initiation rituals that you hear about fraternities and other groups doing, so I didn't think it was too weird. We crouched down amidst some thick bushes and watched. The figure who was perhaps the leader turned around and pointed toward the fire. With his arms still extended, he shouted, "Out there! And then, as if they were waiting for this to happen, everyone else shouted in reply, "We're nothing!" He then crossed his arms over his chest and yelled, "In here!" And everyone replied, "We're family!" They repeated this chant 3 times before the man began delivering a bizarre speech about respect and loyalty and authentic Italian dining. The whole scene was a little too creepy, we had to admit. Silently, we signaled to each other to go back the way we came from, and that's when Frankie tipped over a branch and we all fell into one another like a 4-car pileup. It was like a bad comedy routine, and by the time we all got up, we turned around and all of the robed figures were silently staring at us. I don't know if they even said anything, because at that moment Bad Reggie yelled, "Run!" right behind my ears, and then we were all scrambling and lunging through the trees like madmen. Here's the thing about running through the woods in the dark. It is really easy to get lost. I think we split up within seconds of running. I could hear running and shouting, but I don't know if they were chasing us or if we just running and shouting because we were freaked. Somehow I was the first to make it back to our campsite. I guess my internal compass was just working that night. I ran to our vehicle and waited for a moment, but when I didn't hear anything, I got in and locked the door. Fortunately, there was backup beer in the back seat, so I cracked a warm one open and waited. I was about 3 beers in when suddenly John comes running up, banging on the windows, and he's got blood all over his face like in a horror movie. As soon as I open the door, he says, "I ran into a tree, all right," and then jumped in and locked the doors. We talked about the other guys and whether we should go look for them, but ultimately decided that we were safe there and we would probably just get lost if we went looking for them anyway. At some point we both fell asleep. We were awakened by Frankie banging on the door. It was light out. He had gotten totally lost in the dark and passed out in some bushes. When the sun rose, he was able to find his way back. That meant we still had to find Bad Reggie, who we all decided was probably so drunk last night he probably fell into a ravine or something. We found him sitting on the porch of the mysterious cabin that may or may not have been an Olive Garden. The sign was gone, though. He looked very upset and was resting his head in his hands. We said hello and began joking about his night, but he answered with, "Where did they all go, man? There's nobody in the house." We told him to take it easy and tell us what happened. He said that he got really lost last night and actually made a big loop, ending back near the campfire. He could hear voices, so he hid in some tall grass where he eventually fell asleep. He awoke when the sun was starting to rise and sat up straight. He swears that 2 of the hooded figures were like 50 feet away from him and were carrying the Olive Garden sign around to the van. He says they probably would have heard him if he said anything, and they definitely would have seen him if they just decided to glance in his direction, so he lied back down in the grass and listened. He heard some grunting, and then one of them said something about the fire, and the other one said, "Let it burn." Then they returned to the cabin, and he heard the door close, so he started crawling toward the back of the cabin. He saw the van and the back doors were slightly open. He peered inside, and he said it was really dark, but there were long black bags stacked on top of one another, and the sign was slanted at an angle on top of them. He didn't really have time to investigate because he heard the back door open and slipped to the side of the van and then realized that they would find him there, so he rolled underneath the van. Again, he says he heard two men talking as they approached the vehicle. One of them said,
"So they'll just think some teenagers broke in and had a party. No harm, no foul, man. You worry too much."
And then the other one laughed in this high-pitched manner, and they got in the van. Reggie says he was ready to run, which would not have been hard for him in the slightest, as he won multiple trophies for running in high school and was still pretty fast. The van pulled away, leaving Reggie lying on his chest in some dirt. When it was out of sight, he ran into the cabin and had basically been exploring it until we found him on the porch. After he finished his story, we all checked out the cabin, but there wasn't much to see. It was a very ordinary cabin, with some boring furniture and a stuffed deer head on the wall. As we were leaving and trying to close the door, we noticed it looked like it had been pried open and some of the wood was splintered. We left it slightly ajar. That's when we remembered the fire. Reggie hadn't even gone out in that direction because he was so consumed with his detective work in the cabin. It was still burning when we got there, but it was small and mostly just a big pile of embers. I grabbed a stick and poked around. There were some weird pieces of metal and things in there, but they were pretty badly burned, though John swears they were parts of cell phones. Around the perimeter of the fire, Reggie and Frankie found weird little piles of pine cones and mushrooms and rocks, and announced that some Blair Witch voodoo had happened. I reminded them about the scavenger hunt, and we were all quiet for a while, and then finally Reggie broke the silence by saying, "Dudes, I think those were dead bodies piled in the back of the van." We have been going over the events of that night pretty much every time we hang out. I have been trying to find Brett or Rebecca online, but so far I have been unsuccessful. Maybe they are not missing at all, and I've just fallen for one of Bad Reggie's goofs. I sure hope this is the case. Reggie has been emailing Olive Garden, and judging by their replies, they are more confused than upset. I think they just want him to stop emailing them. They have repeatedly stated that they do not now, nor have ever held any kind of training seminars in the wild, and do not have any plans to do so in the future. I'm basically quoting that. They did send him a coupon for a free bowl of pasta or something because he was so upset, so I guess that's something. If you ever find yourself camping in the woods and stumble across an Olive Garden out in the middle of nowhere, I would advise you to stay away and possibly even call the police. Also, if a job offer seems too good to be true, well, it probably is, and it just might cost you your life. Happy Halloween! Don't forget to subscribe. And remember, true pastas are the scariest pastas.